Art teachers of Reddit, what is your draw anything you want horror story? So, I've had some really funny ones, but this one is not and reminds me whenever I think of it to consider kids' circumstances. I worked in a low-income, high-immigrant population school, and there was this girl who was amazing, outspoken, kind, great grasp of English. She drew a picture of her brother and her. I asked her who else was in the picture since there appeared to be a part of a third person, and she calmly replied, "That's my brother's head. He was killed in our village right before we went to the refugee camp." And then I look her up and down and say something sympathetic to mask my horror, and then she says, "Yeah, they came into my village, grabbed all the boys, and were going to take them away. My brother and his friend tried to run, so they cut off his head. I was standing right there. Would you like me to draw you a picture?" I said no thank you, and I asked her where her other brother was during all of this. And then she said, "Oh, we dressed him up like a girl. He makes a cute girl." And I should mention, before this exchange, we were talking about One Direction or something else. Story number 2. When I was in high school, part of the final exams/assessments in art class involved picking an object of your choice based on a written passage and painting it as best as you can. My art teacher told us about one kid who chose a book as his subject. He turned up with an art book with a professional still life painting on the cover and proceeded to recreate the painting stroke by stroke. If I remember correctly, there were phone calls made to his parents and to the Board of Education over it, but the kid got away with it in the end. I assume there were some changes to the rules after that. Edit. Since this is now my top comment, here's a bonus story about the same assessment. When the time for my own assessment came around, the object I chose paint from the written passage was a skull. The next day, the teacher made his way around the class, asking students individually about their chosen objects. The art teacher was quite elderly, and he was quite a reserved and somewhat mysterious fellow. He had also taken a shine to me as I was pretty good at art and more enthusiastic than the others. And he makes his way around to me, and I tell him I want to paint a skull. "And where do you plan on finding one?" he asks me. And I told him I had seen one of those plastic replica skeletons in the biology lab, and I was going to ask about borrowing the skull. Then he blows off that idea as if it were complete nonsense. He paused for a moment and then said a little more quietly, "I can get you a skull." And I said, okay, not knowing what he was getting at really. And the guy goes off into his little storage room, rummages for a couple of minutes, and comes back with a real human skull in his hand. I politely asked him how he came by a real human skull, and he turned his gaze away pensively and said, "An old friend gave it to me." And then he left it at that. Okay, we're only 2 stories in, and what are the first 2 stories? Oh my god, I haven't done one of these art assignment videos, but I'm terrified, yo. Where did he get the human skull? I don't think it was given to him. I think he took it. I think he ripped the skull out of his friend and then beat him to death with it. Okay, that's what I think. That is a red versus blue reference, by the way. But anyway, next story. Story number 4. Not an art teacher, but for 1 year, I was a preschool teacher a few years back. It was like Friday at 4 p.m. in the winter. I gave the kids some time to color and draw and just do whatever they wanted. 10 minutes go by and one of my students, 4 at the time, who I had a love-hate relationship with, came up to me and said, "Look, OP, I made a drawing for you." And I gave him a warm smile and I asked him to show it to me. It was a drawing of his parents doing the nasty. He even got the wiener part right with balls and everything. Me, I'm totally shocked but remained as neutral as possible because I knew if I had reacted in a major way, he would have continued to make more drawings like this. This is something I learned about him. So I said, "Let's put that in your backpack and we can show mommy when she picks you up." And dad comes that day. More embarrassing for me. And I told him about the drawing and he turned bright red explaining the other night how he had walked in on them having sex. We awkwardly laughed about it, and that was that. Story number 5. I am an art teacher, but I don't teach art. I was teaching a class of 7-year-olds who are usually a blessing, but there's just one kid who has some real problems. He also cannot speak English at all. Even after me spending a year trying to teach him and all of his classmates progressing well, he just refuses to engage with any teacher and is extremely disruptive, often crying and screaming. I think he has special needs, but that's not handled well in China. Anyway, after battling with him to no avail, assigning him class police roles, everything, I just gave up this one day and gave him some paper to draw on while the rest of the kids learn without him distracting them. And he drew a picture of me with a large pee-pee and a lot of knives in me with blood and wrote my name in perfect English. It was eerie, but I just felt sad and concerned about what had happened to this boy. The school gave him no support, and I only saw him for about an hour a week. I left the school shortly after. It was unrelated, and I wonder how he is now. Story number 6. When I was in high school, I was trying to learn how to draw perspective for the first time, and I was doodling a wolf howling, mostly because I enjoy wolves, and there's plenty of references online that I could check my work against. However, a seated howling wolf, when viewed from the front, doesn't show eyes or ears or most of the face, just an upturned muzzle and chin. I was actually kind of glad of this at first, because I sucked at positioning wolf eyes properly. I could draw pretty eyes and I could draw heads a little, but put the two together and it all looked wrong. So anyway, I'm drawing this wolf, and I think I'm doing a fine job of it, and I've got the muzzle and a bit of a nose and the cheeks and the neck and the chest and all of that, and everything looked fine. I was actually kind of proud of it. At least I was until I got home, several hours later, and I pulled it out again to work on it. And you see, what confronted me at the end of the day was not my howling wolf, but what looked remarkably like a fuzzy, vaguely cone-shaped male private part with some kind of diseased black tip, all perched atop 4 paws and a tail. I've never drawn a howling wolf from that perspective again. So, we're only a few stories in, but I'm starting to see a trend here. A lot of genitalia, male genitalia. But what about the ladies? We can't leave them out. That's not equality. We need weird drawings of every person. Oh boy. Anyway, next story. Story number 7. When I was in the first grade, they had everyone in every grade draw something. It could be anything. I drew an evil snail that had gotten snatched up by a bird, and I had a voice bubble that said, "I will be back," or something like that, coming from this evil snail. In the foreground, I drew my family. That was it. That was the whole picture. Flash forward to like 6 months, and my really bad drawing was chosen as number 1 in the first grade. Then, the school had an assembly where they showed the top drawings from each grade. So, I go up to the front with the other winners as the principal goes through each one and says a little something about it. Eventually, they get to my drawing, and I quickly realized why I was chosen. They thought the bird was a plane and the evil snail was my dad leaving to deploy. Important note is that the school was on a military base. My dad had never been deployed and was in fact depicted on the ground with the rest of my family, but I just stood there and accepted the award, and I never told another living soul because I was so embarrassed and guilty. Story number 8. I was an art teacher for 4 years and have so many stories. One that comes to mind is a drawing that this strange little child who was oddly obsessed with me made as a gift. Now, for context, my personal aesthetic is what my friends affectionately call adult tomboy goth, which is to say I wear all black, somewhat androgynous clothing, and have a penchant for the dark and absurd. Of course, in work environments, I dress more professionally, but my kids all knew I was a dark-humored little oddball, and they loved me for it. So, this girl is doing free draw, and every time I walk over, she covers up the paper with her arm and hisses at me like a cat. After about an hour, she scurries over to me with this huge grin on her face and announces, "OP, OP, I made you this thing!" And oh my lord, oh boy, it was the best gift I had ever received from a child. The drawing was of a skeleton beckoning a crying girl with no eyes into a pre-dug grave. The gravesite was elaborately mapped out with a whole underground portion where the coffin would be, a tombstone and little flowers around the tombstone. I laminated it, and to this day it is still on my bedroom door, even after 3 moves around the country. I effing miss teaching. Story number 9. I had a 5th grade student who was very shy/hesitant to start her work. The project was on identity, and kids were supposed to draw things about themselves inside of a silhouette of their heads that we had traced. She was almost in tears because she was very insecure and couldn't think of what to draw. I was trying to help her out by asking easy questions like, "What's your favorite animal? What's your favorite TV show to watch on Netflix?" And finally, at, "What's your favorite food?" She perked up, left my desk, and got to work. A few minutes later, she proudly brings her drawing to me. I did it, I drew a taco, and I also made it pink because pink is my favorite color. I know tacos aren't pink, but in art, things can be any color, right? Don't you think so? Tacos being pink? OP? It took everything in me to stifle my giggles, and I reassured her her taco was beautiful and that yes, it could be any color she wanted. She then proudly showed everyone in the room her pink taco. Thank God she was not a 7th or 8th grader. It went all over their sweet, innocent heads, and they all praised and encouraged her. What a great day. Well, folks, we're not even 10 stories in, and we have reached equality. Sexism is over. Misandry, misogyny is done for. Genitalia will unite everybody, okay?
Next story.
Story number 10. When I was a sophomore in high school, my art final was a paint anything you want assignment. So me being the creative mind that I am, painted a photorealistic octopus that may have resembled my art teacher teaching an art class. Underwater scene, super duper trippy, probably my best single piece of artwork I've made up to that point. Well, long story short, my teacher didn't like the route I went and gave me a C on my final. When my art class found out about this, it was almost an absolute riot because they thought I turned in one of the best finals of the year. Fast forward to the art show on the final day of school, and my octopus was awarded a Best in Class ribbon. An amazing take that moment for me against that teacher, and also taught me a valuable lesson that everyone judges art differently, and I just need to keep doing my own thing. Story number 11. This was when I was a TA last summer. It was for youth art classes at a very nice art museum, and I was helping out with the group of 5 to 8-year-olds. There was this one 6-year-old student who would act up a lot during class, always talk over the teacher, but then produce really beautiful and detailed drawings. The only issue was that they were always monsters from the Godzilla movies. No matter what the students were assigned to, he managed to make these monsters the main image. Now, this would be fine if I were the teacher. My main goal for the kids is to finish the day wanting to keep making art. But the actual teachers I worked with were a lot more rigid. The student gained a bit of reputation for being difficult to work with and not respecting the teachers. I was essentially tasked with handling the student and making sure he stays on task. What I soon realized was that this kid was insanely talented. He had an advanced grasp on animal anatomy, visual storytelling, and composition. After working with him for a month, it became clear that he only acted up when the art being taught was something he was already skilled at, which was most of the time since it was a beginner's class. He would quickly finish the assignments and get bored, then add Godzilla to them. Whenever he was learning a new technique or using new materials, he wouldn't do this. He was also very book smart and very nice once he saw I wouldn't get mad at him for his art. I ended up talking to his mom after class one day and explained why he would often get in trouble. I then told her that the class was honestly too entry-level for him and that she should see about getting him private lessons. She was extremely happy to hear this and was thrilled that her son actually liked me. He had a rough time with the school teachers too. The summer program ended soon after that, and I haven't seen him since. Story number 12. Not a teacher, but when I was about 13 in art class back in the early 2000s, we had a leaf project. Basically, go out, find some leaves, and trace them. I always loved putting my own spin on things, so after I traced them on this massive piece of paper, I started putting faces on them and giving them hands. Then it became police officer leaves and robber leaves shooting at each other. Imagine a big leaf with tiny stick figure hands and feet holding a very crude gun and a stereotypical bag of money with the money sign on it. And it was meant to be funny. They're leaves. The teacher turned the project into the principal, and they called my mom suggesting a psychological evaluation based on my violent drawing. When they brought my mom in to look at the drawing, she said, "What, are you nuts? It's supposed to be funny. How's a leaf supposed to hold a gun?" Thank you, Mom. You get me. Story number 13. Elementary art teacher, 7 years. 2 craziest things from radically different ends of the crazy crap kids put on paper spectrum. First year of teaching, a 3rd grader earns a free draw period with me. Spends 30 minutes drawing pictures of the angels and demons who come to him in his dreams and tell him how to end the life of his father. In class, he never did the assignments I gave him, but he found drawing so therapeutic that I just let him draw whatever he wanted. He needed that more than he needed to learn the parts of a landscape, and I will never forget that kid as long as I live. I hope he's doing okay. In the most recent year of teaching, I did a start with a dot lesson for the first day of kindergarten. Kid drew a dot, then proceeded to draw an incredibly detailed design for a Rube Goldberg type machine, the butt launcher, which launched disembodied butts into space. Genuinely hysterical. Story number 14. I'm not an art teacher, but I do have experience as the rogue student in this section. My art teacher gave leeway when assigning us things to do. Like, he gave us a topic like pointillism or realism, etc., and told us to draw what we want with those topics. Well, I decided from a certain point in the year that all my pictures would have top hats, or the main focus would be a top hat that I would either hide multiple top hats in an assignment, or the picture would be just a top hat but in the required art style. Hell, I even made the pop art assignment a trash can with a top hat as a lid, and he didn't deny it, but he made me turn it in for extra credit. So then, from a certain point, he told me that anytime he finds a top hat, he will mark a point off because he was getting tired of them. From that point on, I made it so every picture had a top hat, and it was a manhunt for him to find it. Sometimes I would get marked off 3 points, maybe 5 points. It depended on how many top hats I hid in my picture. My final for art class was a top hat made of top hats, and he actually enjoyed that one and gave me a good grade for it. So wherever you are, Mr. Schneider, you're welcome. Thank you for a fun year because I hated everywhere I went in that building, but you and your class made me enjoy coming to school and waking up in the morning. Story number 15. Former art student and now private graphic design and architecture teacher here. I've never openly admitted that I don't really like the idea of letting my students do whatever they want, since architecture is a seemingly easy subject, but as time goes by, it becomes more and more difficult. But sometimes they would sneakily snarl or mumble about me under their breaths about how awful I teach, or something related to my simple but strict rules. So someday, I don't even remember how much time ago, out of the blue, I told the students that came to my course to take out a new sheet of paper and put the thing that they were working on back in their bags or in the art shelf next to my desk. I still remember the panic on their faces. Oh God. I sat with my back arched on my desk and looked them in the eyes, slowly telling them to take out their phones and search for interesting things to draw. Not only homes, buildings, or intricate churches, I also gave them the possibility to draw whatever they wanted, including animals, static nature, and portraits. As I mentioned, I am a private teacher, and the school I teach in is a bit more different. The courses are daily from Monday to Friday, timetables are not always matching, and the class was always 8 hours straight. But in that time, students could go and come. I could go and do some errands around the school or even go and get food. Also, we don't have straight attendance. The timetables are made that at least one day a week busy students can come and relax for a bit. It wasn't mandatory to come during school, but it was to come at least twice during the exam week at the end of the semester. And anyway, as a private art school, everyone by all ages can enroll after the entrance exam and paying the small semester tax. I think it's around $50 per semester. So I was staying at my desk, watching them hurrying to take their phones out and plug in their headphones, ready to let creativity take over. I stood there for some time, before I left for a couple of minutes to make myself a coffee since it was early in the morning. I walked back in and placed myself in the same place, watching the students being caught in their own little worlds, sipping from my burning mug. As I was strolling with my eyes on the papers and easels of the pupils, I came across an older boy. I think he was older than me, since I'm 20 and I finished art school at 18, and his easel was facing me straight, not letting me see it. He was always taking quick glances at me as I was doing some strange thing, but actually I was just doing my usual routine of checking. I turned around, still thinking about the odd, awkward tension between me and the guy, putting some old soundtrack on my vinyl player, doing my thing, following to continue my drawing of the Notre Dame Cathedral at the back of the class. But I was called to get some papers from the secretary's office. And just as I was about to enter the class again, I was surprised by the sudden thing that hit my nose. The door was open from the inside, and it mocked me right in the face. Thank God the papers didn't spill on the ground. I opened my eyes, and in front of them was the strange guy, scared, almost dripping from the embarrassment of accidentally hitting me in the face with a door. I just shrugged it off and bid him goodbye, and that I am waiting for him again. He quickly came back to his senses and ran off, blushing for his dear life. I entered the room, carefully placing the papers in one of my drawers, and I walked straight to my easel. As I was marching through the seats, I noticed the pad of the boy. He left without it. I was going to neatly fold it up until next time, but instead I was met with small portraits of me, of how I was staying on the desk and how I was drinking coffee, also how I was checking the vinyl player. I instantly blushed too and gently thought that I judged him wrong, and maybe I could ask him for his number next time. Too bad there was no next time. The pandemic broke out and the courses were suspended. Never have I ever thought that the sentence "draw anything you want" can get the hopeless romantics out of people. Story number 16. This one is actually about me. I arrived in the US just in time for first grade. Where I came from, kids took city buses, not school buses, buses which adults also used to get around the city, and we would take them to get to school. Walked by themselves we would do, and by the time they got to first grade, handled their own money to pay for lunch, if you didn't bring some from home, and were allowed to settle their differences fighting. Basically, we had to mature a hell of a lot quicker than our American counterparts. Suffice to say, I was quite familiar with rated R movies and violence by this age. Nothing in the movies compared to some of the crap I saw in real life. So one time, after being given the go-ahead to draw whatever I want, I decided to depict a scene in one of my old favorite movies at the time, Terminator 2. Particularly the scene where Arnold shoots his way out of being surrounded by SWAT. So I drew the Terminator, black leather jacket, sunglasses, and sawed-off shotgun, along with all of the bodies of cops he left behind. Just as I was getting ready to start coloring in the blood, my teacher notices and starts freaking out. This was a couple of years before Columbine, by the way, and the next thing I know, I'm at the principal's office waiting for my parents to show up. The principal thinks I saw a violent movie without my parents' permission and is going to get me in trouble. Well, when my parents arrive, they get pissed off at the teacher for getting me in trouble when she said I could draw whatever I wanted. They inform the principal that I saw Terminator 2 with them and they don't understand what the big deal is. The principal and the teacher can't fathom that parents would be okay with exposing their kids to R-rated movies. So they wanted me to see a school counselor, but my parents rejected the proposal outright when it was explained to them that they were worried I might have violent tendencies. And some 20 years later, and I've never had any problems with the law or violent behavior. Turns out my parents knew what they were doing. Story number 17. The Scholastic Art and Writing Competition was always a big thing to the art teachers in my school district, and each year there would be a unit in both English and art class to create a piece each student could submit for consideration. It is only for ages 13 and up now, but when I was in second grade or third grade over 20 years ago, there was a regional version of it for younger kids. How it worked for that part of it was that they would have a theme, basically a word, and you would have to create something around that theme. The year I'm talking about now, the theme was Sabbath. Looking back, that makes sense. The regional portion of the competition was probably sponsored by the local college, which is very religious, as is our community in general. Well, everyone likes to think they are, but anyway, my family is not very religious. My parents identify as Christian, but we don't go to church regularly until a year or two after this happened. And though I know their beliefs and understood the basics, it wasn't something that would have been the first thing that came to mind. We, the students, were all encouraged to work on our pieces alone and not show anyone but the teacher to encourage originality and free thinking. So I didn't realize that most of my classmates were creating things that had to do with Jesus and Christianity. I was also really into art and loved making things and drawing and trying to bring what was in my brain out into the world for other people to see. I didn't ask for any help, so no one saw what I was working on until I turned it in. My piece was a drawing of a bunch of witches in the woods dancing around a fire. I did not win. Story number 18. I was teaching art class for high schoolers, and I was only in my low 20s, so I had yet to develop my teacher cynicism. I was pretty chipper in those days. And one of the girls drew a caricature of me with buck teeth and my long hippie hair and a floppy fisherman hat, and it said, "Come on guys, try a little, art if fun." I laughed my ass off over that, and I saved it. I still have it to this day. Then I had a buddy taking a long night class. It was a split class, so he would be there an hour, then the whole class would take a half-hour break, and then come back. My buddy had just bought some 005 micron pens, and rather than go eat or go somewhere, he just sat in the class and started to draw tiny little robots. Each was less than a centimeter tall, no two alike. And as he was almost done filling the page, a stunningly gorgeous young lady comes up to him and said to him, "Wow, those are neat little men you got there." To which he replied, "No, they're robots." And of course, once he realized what and how he said it, he just chuckled nervously and turned away to hide his face. Story number 19. Not quite on topic, but here it is anyways. When I was in elementary school, my school couldn't keep to one art teacher, so we had a new one pretty much every year. One year, we had this guy. I'm gonna call him Mike. Mike was one of those teachers where you know he is new to teaching, but the thing is, nobody could pinpoint his age, but I'm guessing he was like 33. Mike wasn't a very good teacher, and I remember one time he yelled at some second graders in the hallway for getting some glue on their hands. I think he was already on thin ice when he got to this moment. And then one day we were making collages with cutouts from magazines that he had brought in. But Mike effed up with this project because he had brought in some adult content magazines. And even worse, they were at a table full of me and my friends. We didn't say anything, but also didn't know what to do with them at that point, until one of my friends went all out on an art play that I will not forget. Being that it was elementary, we got a long session for art, like an hour or a little more, so we could complete our collages and show them off at the end. My friend decided to cut out a full naked lady and put it on, so when everyone shares theirs at the end, it would go public. So here comes the time. We start sharing them around, and Mike finally gets to my table. And I shared mine, and then two of my friends did so as well, and then we get to my last friend's masterpiece. And also, we had to explain why we chose what to put on it. And then Mike stands up and holds it up, and Mike's face effing drops. He didn't even do anything because I don't think he was even effing ready for this F up. And then my friend starts explaining, and he begins with everything else first before the naked lady. And when he finally gets there, the cherry on top was he played dumb, since we had a class full of very innocent kids. I was in a gifted program, so it was full of a lot of kids who were smart but weren't very knowledgeable about random stuff like this yet. Also, I shouldn't have been in that program. I am not smart. And then anyway, my friend tries to fit in and makes it seem like some poor innocent kid was exposed to all of this. He finishes, and Mike is like, "Where did you get that?" And my friend says, "From the interesting magazine you gave to our table." And my friend didn't even get in trouble, because if it was brought up, Mike knew he would likely get fired. But within the next month, we already had a long-term sub for that class. So I'm guessing the word got out. Story number 20. Alright, this is probably going to come off angry because I'm bitter about it to this day, but I was the student in this situation and it pisses me off just thinking about it. So, I went to a pretty prestigious private school, the type that didn't let you wear jeans except on Fridays, and our shirts couldn't have words on them. Now, our art class had a daily sketchbook thing, and if you folded over a page, the art teacher swore up and down she wouldn't look at it, as some people used it as a sort of diary type thing. I doodled a lot, and at one point I drew a character holding a gun. Literally just a crappily drawn gun with a crappily drawn pistol in a crappily drawn pose. So I fold the page, forget about it, then I accidentally left my sketchbook in the classroom overnight. The next day, I didn't even get to my first class before I get called into the counselor's office. My mom was there, the principal was there, a freaking armed security officer was there. So yup, the teacher had looked through my sketchbook and seen the drawing of a gun, and all the other personal things that I had written and drawn in there too probably, and essentially decided I was a threat. I was humiliated, of course. They suspended me for 3 days and made me see a criminal psychologist to make sure I wasn't going to shoot up the place. I stopped drawing altogether for a long time after that. I was ashamed and felt guilty for something I should have never felt guilty for. The way they looked at me when I walked in is something I will never forget. Like I was a menace, a threat. They looked hateful. I was just a scared little kid. It was awful, and it's something that still keeps me up at night sometimes. So I have to say I was in a somewhat similar position as OP. I didn't get sent to the principal's office or anything, but I had a teacher read something that the teacher wasn't supposed to read and said they wouldn't read, but read it anyway, and I felt so violated and icky, and I still think about it to this day, actually, so I can relate to OP to a degree. But anyway, next story. Story number 21. Oh man, I wish I wasn't so late to this thread, but here goes. I had just began substitute teaching. This day I was teaching 5 periods of math and 1 period of art. The instructions for the art class were very simple. Something along the lines of, the students have learned 2 new techniques this week. They may draw whatever they like as long as they use these techniques. I forget now what those techniques were, something like perspective and shading, something basic. So I set the students to work with these instructions. They ask me, "Really? Anything we want?" And I say, "Yup, anything. Just show off your new shading techniques that you know." I walk around the class for a few minutes making sure everyone understood and was working on the assignment. I sat down at the teacher's desk and began reading the lesson for the math class I was teaching the next period to make sure I understood it fully. After a while, I told the students to pass in their assignments and clean up their materials in classroom. I began to walk around the class to make sure everyone is moving on to this task. But I met with, "But Miss OP, our teacher never collects our in-class assignments." And I said, "Oh, I know, but that's because she is usually here to see your work. But as a sub, I have to collect this work so I can leave it for your teacher so they see what you worked on today." And some of the students were adamant that I not collect the work. Then I see some students giggling. Well, I collect the work and the students leave in a hurry to lunch. And I see I'm left with a stack of very nicely shaded wieners. Turns out, if you tell a bunch of 8th graders they can draw anything they want, they will all draw a bunch of wieners. Story number 22. Not a teacher, but in 2nd grade, this boy and I were doodling in our cursive handwriting workbooks, and one page had a picture of an open bathrobe. I drew boobs in the opening and the robe to be funny, and the other kid followed suit and added a bush on his drawing. I thought this bush looked unrealistic, so I tried to draw a better one. I think we were trying to one-up each other in terms of edginess. I don't remember who drew what first, but I ended up drawing her head and limbs next to appropriate openings in the robe, but I drew them detached, and then also added blood drops or maybe even a puddle or something. And then my teacher called me up after class one day and was very serious, asking me why I drew that and why I drew her limbs separated from her body, etc. I lied and said I just drew it that way, and they weren't supposed to be detached, and the drops were just water because she'd been in the shower. But she had X's for eyes, so I don't know who I thought I was fooling. Anyway, she told me not to draw things like that anymore because it was inappropriate. She said I could still do other doodles like the worm that I had drawn coming out of an apple on a different page, and I legitimately thought I was in trouble for drawing a naked lady or a dead lady or both. But as an adult, I realized she was probably trying to deduce if I had seen something horrible in either real life or on TV TV or something. Nah, I just wanted to draw a naked lady, and I think the other kid influenced me to take it to a creepy place. He was one of the bad kids who was always getting into trouble, and I had never drawn anything like that before, so I'm pretty sure he was egging me on. Makes me wonder what kind of stuff he might have seen as a kid, though. Story number 23. Not a teacher, but when I was in high school, our ceramics teacher let us have a free design week to form and create our own pieces. I was very excited and made a Pokemon ball with a section at the top, about the size of a quarter, indented with a hole in the middle of it. I put 4 additional holes around the sides, then painted and placed it into the kiln. By the next week, I looked all over the completed project's shelf but could not find my Pokeball. The teacher noticed me looking around and asked which one was my project. When I explained it to her, she pulled me into one of the side rooms and pulled my Pokeball out of a drawer. She asked if I thought I was being clever or if I thought she was stupid. She said, "I have several students make things to smoke out of, so nothing will get past me." And I looked at her with confusion and told her I was making an incense cone burner and explained how the smoke would come out of the sides and how I loved Pokemon, so that was the purpose of the look. She apologized a bunch and gave me my project. And as soon as class was over, I was so excited to go and try my bowl out because I lied, of course. I was going to smoke weed out of my Pokeball. Well, as luck would have it, as I was on my way out to my car, I slipped on a patch of ice, fell on my back, and heard my Pokeball break. I still think of it and what could have been. Story number 24. Not an art teacher, but in 11th or 12th grade high school, my art teacher told us to make a clay bowl, and we could design and decorate it however we want. So, I made a really cool bowl with a band showing the movement of the moon around the earth like a frame by frame. Inside was another band showing the phases of the moon in the same fashion. In the very center was a crescent moon and stars. I had attached handles and feet. I made sure it sat level and put a lot of work into it. Got it kiln fired and started applying the ceramic paint when we were told by the teacher that all of our bowls would be auctioned off to raise money for something that I no longer recall, and I didn't care about at the time. We were told that the participation was mandatory. If I had known that starting off, I would have made a bowl that I would be glad to part with. I was about to drop out of school anyways, so on my last day, I quietly wrapped my bowl in my sweater and slipped it in my bag. I took it home, hoping to finish it someday, and I never did get to finish painting it or get the paint on it kiln fired. I still have it in my house and I still love it. Maybe I'll find a way to finish it someday. Story number 25. I was the irritating student here. I had an absolutely amazing, lovely, goofy art teacher in high school. I also have a slight obsession with ducks, so of course, I found a way to incorporate a duck in every single project. She thought it was funny at first, but before the year was over, I had her threatening to take points off my grade if I included a duck in the next project. I mean, I was definitely putting more effort trying to figure out how to hide a duck than I was trying to actually do the project. But she fixed me real good the following year though. Self-portraits all friggin' year. High schoolers don't exactly love and accept the way they look, so making them create different art pieces around their face isn't very nice. But the joke is on her. There was a duck hidden in each one of those projects too. I am a duck.
Okay, guys, you know where I'm going with this, right? The top hat guy and the duck guy just need to team up and put top hats on ducks. You can't tell me that there is not money to be made there, or entertainment, or shenanigans, or some other miscellaneous stuff. People were pointing out in a recent video that I said miscellaneous. Well, you know what? No one ever corrected me. I'm sorry, okay? It's just the letter C. Is it that big of a deal? I don't think so, okay? You don't have to hurt my feelings. I'm joking. I don't care that much. But we all mispronounce words from time to time. But, you know, I get paid to do it. But anyway, guys, we are at the end of the video. Thank you all so much for watching. Have a really good day, and bye-bye!